West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
And in some of the states, there are impediments to just switching someone out like that. 14 million people went through the process and chose this nominee, Joe Biden. Now a handful of people have gotten together and decided he's no longer suitable. That's not how this system works. They are violating democratic principles. And I think that's a real problem, and I think there'll be a lot said about that in the days ahead.
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, that was Mike Johnson. And of course, as we all know, there's been a lot of talk about legal challenges from people like Republican Speaker Mike Johnson. So to be clear, are there any legal obstacles that would prevent Kamala Harris from becoming the Democratic nominee now that Joe Biden has stepped aside?
Absolutely not. There is 0.000% chance that Mike Johnson and his fevered dream of somehow there being legal action to prevent Kamala Harris or whoever the Democratic National Committee nominates and submits to the states to keep them off the ballot. There is no chance that will happen. You know, Mike Johnson has been hanging out with insurrectionists for so long that he has flipped the legal from the illegal. Mike, this is legal. What you all did in 2020 was illegal.
So what's going to happen next? Like, what should viewers keep an eye out for this week?
Look, what will happen next is right now, you know, Kamala Harris is accumulating supporters, delegates at a very, very fast clip. She so far is the only announced candidate. So you should expect that will continue on the sort of political track. On the legal track, the Rules and Bylaws Committee, which is the committee of the Democratic National Committee that sets the rules, hence the name, for how the nomination process takes place. They have announced that they're going to have a meeting on Thursday. They're going to put out draft rules in advance of that on Tuesday. And so that will lay out the process. But, you know, I think that at this point, regardless of what that process is, it is pretty clear that Kamala Harris is going to be the Democratic nominee for president in the general election in 2024.
Now, how fast after the meeting on Thursday will we have any indication as to some finalized plan?
So, you know, I think that, frankly, they will likely finalize the plan and vote on the plan on Thursday. You know, I think that what you'd expect is that they are going to put out a draft of what the rules are before that, and then there'll be a meeting to either adopt the draft or, you know, in theory they could send it back, but, you know, I think they would either adopt it or else make some revisions to it, but adopt the final version then on Thursday.
Now, I want to switch your attention here over to Donald Trump's frantic Truth Social posts. He had posted that basically alleging that Democrats were committing fraud because Republicans spent tens of millions of dollars on a convention that was focused solely on attacking Joe Biden, only for Joe Biden, of course, to step back and not run in 2024. And so Donald Trump is alleging that it's all a waste, and so Democrats are now on the line to pay him back that money for this purported fraud. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, first of all, Donald Trump is an expert in fraud. So he's got that going for him, just like Mike Johnson is an expert in frivolous legal arguments, right? So they're sort of lining up to type here. But of course, it's not a fraud. You know, the Republican Party spent the money that it spent campaigning on the issues that it wished to campaign on, including, for example, Donald Trump's golf game. You know, an underappreciated topic at the convention was
right.
were various speakers attesting to his golf game. And, you know, they're obviously panicking. Donald Trump is panicking. His campaign did this big spread with, I think it was Tim Alberta in the Atlantic, in which they boasted that, you know, they were going to cruise to a big victory because they had Joe Biden all figured out. I'm not sure they had Joe Biden all figured out to begin with, but they definitely, I don't think, have a plan to run against Kamala Harris. And so, you know, Donald Trump is now sort of rage tweeting in the middle of the night, or rage truthing, falsity, whatever it's called.
Yeah, he's just raging in the middle of the night, I think is the nice blanket term that we'll go with here. So what's your response to the desperate Republican talking point that this was a coup and that somehow Republicans are now the party of democracy?
Okay, so first of all, they are definitely experts in coups. I mean, let's just start with the fact that the effort to stage an insurrection to overturn the free and fair election on January 6, 2021 was arguably a coup, or at least a coup-like. Donald Trump sent his lawyers to the U.S. Supreme Court with the hypothetical that he, if elected president, could engage in a coup, as well as assassinate his political opponents without facing any criminal sanctions. So they definitely have coup on the brain. And, you know, I joke about that, but it is actually something very, very serious that I hope we turn to before the interview ends about, you know, kind of what the stakes are here. But of course, it's not a coup. I mean, the process of American democracy is that each of the political parties nominate their candidates pursuant to their party rules. And, you know, the DNC's party rules, like the Republicans' party rules, both of them, have always provided that there would be delegates who are selected before the convention and before the nominating process, if that takes place in advance of the convention, as we saw in 2020. You know, that it is ultimately the delegates that vote that are the final sort of check and the final requirement for there to be a nominee. And for decades in our country, the rule was that actually primaries and caucuses didn't really count at all, right? They were chosen. It was really all the delegates. So it was only the delegates. So this is not a coup. This is American democracy. I do find it interesting that the same people who are constantly telling me that democracy docket should not be called democracy docket because we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, now they are all saying this is not democratic. So it is democratic, but I'm glad at least they have dropped that silly little pretense they go through.
And of course, as we get deeper into this process and everything becomes finalized and the rules become fleshed out and we have a little bit more clarity in terms of what we can be looking at moving forward, that will all be included on Democracy Docket, which is the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections. So for those watching right now, if you're not yet subscribed, please make sure to subscribe. It's an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis. Mark, more broadly speaking, what was your reaction to this shocking news that President Biden wouldn't be running for re-election?
Look, my reaction was that it really illustrates the difference between the two parties, right? The Republican Party decided that it was going to nominate a narcissistic authoritarian who is a convicted felon on 34 counts, who had been twice impeached and who was responsible for the January 6th insurrection at the nation's capital. Notwithstanding the fact that the Republican Party knew all of that about them, every single Republican of any stature, all the members of Congress, all the House, the governors, they all rallied behind this guy. And that is the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, President Biden deserves an enormous amount of credit. He recognized the situation that had developed within the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party had a very public and somewhat painful discussion about what the right way forward was, and President Biden will be remembered as a patriot and a hero for doing the kind of thing that, frankly, Donald Trump is incapable of, and the Republican Party is resistant to doing, which is to understand that the most important thing is to protect the country, to protect our democracy. And the stark relief of the two political parties has never been greater than we have seen over the last week to 10 days.
Yeah, that's perfectly put. I mean, the dichotomy on display where you have one person who voluntarily and selflessly relinquished power that he already had in deference to what would be best for democracy versus a guy who was so intent on clinging on to power that wasn't even his anymore because he'd already lost the election that he went so far as to incite an insurrection and seek to assassinate his own vice president for not bending to his will, all so that he could retain that power. I mean, it doesn't get more clear than that in terms of the priorities of the two parties on full display, and really a commentary on what this upcoming election in November is going to be about. So
and I want to say, because I said I wanted to come back to this, the last 10 days have illustrated, hopefully to everyone, what the stakes are. You know, we've had a lot of conversations over the course of the last year about, you know, what happens if Joe Biden wins, what are his policies, what are Donald Trump. I think the stakes are clearer now than ever before. So I think we need to again tell everyone that there is nothing more important that you are going to do than make sure you are registered to vote. Your friends and your family are registered to vote, and that they vote for Kamala Harris and the entire Democratic ticket from top to bottom. That is what we need to all be focused on for this November, because the stakes of that of us not doing that are that Donald Trump, who is the worst impulse of the worst political party, could be back in power.
And I would also add that once you kind of cross that threshold into the kind of government that he wants to usher in, it's difficult, if not impossible, to come back from that. So this is our chance right now to make sure that we, either continue to function as a democracy, or it's a fundamentally different country than it is right now.
It is Tuesday, the 23rd of July of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, our little Yorkie, of course, is convalescing and taking a rest a little bit later this morning, so we will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Of course, the Spanish is just as nice. It's more expensive only because there's lots less of it. Though I have to say they are making inroads in their production, increasing it by a lot, so maybe the Spanish paprika will come down in price. Regardless, either one is just as fine. They're actually quite equal. Just one is more expensive because of supply and demand. Indeed. Okay, so I don't really have an update on Precious this morning because she hasn't gotten up. So she's under my bed. I'm certain I've checked all the other places that she would be. And so she's under my bed snoozing. And we'll see. At any time, she's going to bounce up and need some attention, meaning, okay, I want to be fed now. And that's a good sign. Always is. So, poor Gunner, we have to starve him because he has to keep losing weight, and it's actually good because he became a little too rotund. And but he knows that little Precious, boy, she eats a lot. I gotta tell you, for that little thing, but she's sick. And Doc said let her have what she wants, and she is, and so I'm not worried about it. We'll have her as long as we have her. But poor Gunner, he's got to lose some weight so we can keep having him. Plus all the other attendant issues from a dog with folds. Bullies have folds, and they have to be taken care of. And the bigger the bully, or the more rotund, the more the folds have to be. They need to be looked after. So it's always better. Anyway, that's a long way around saying that the surgery that's coming up in September is the eyelid on the bottom is turning under, and the hairs are poking into the white of his eyeball, causing irritation and for it to tear all the time. So a combination of tending to that fold and him losing weight. Well, the losing weight is a general thing, but also it won't be as pronounced of a fold and a much easier and better process in which to correct it. So don't want the dog to be irritable. Not nice. Let it be comfortable. We love them. So we got that. Am I a childless dog guy? I guess I am. I'm a granddad, though, so I guess I still have kids of sorts. Anyway, what is up with J.D. Vance? Boy, you know, being a MAGA means you got to be, like, totally cruel, right? We don't know why Kamala doesn't have children, and why should we care? It could be one of two things, right? That she's not able to, or she chose not to. And you know what? It's none of our damn business. It's quite simple. I don't know. I have no idea why I'm being accused of being some sort of woke commie race baiter, just because I like the idea of, you know, not getting into other people's business. Okay? Got a guy here in town yesterday who I don't know. We have these wildfires. I'm sorry. I need more coffee, I guess. We have these wildfires going on here. And so all the people who for decades said that we were like commie hippies and get out of our way. We're going to kick you, you commie tree-hugging hippie. And all the shit we told them over all these decades about how you could mitigate this problem. I'm not talking about the big things. I'm talking about little things like replanting the forest that you just cut down. Oh, no, the Koch brothers said, because they had timber industries all over the Northwest. Oh, no, we can't do that. We have to create a shortage. Well, creating a shortage in timber means that you got to think 20, 30 years out. And if you guess wrong, whole towns are decimated, the mill goes broke, everybody loses their job, and guess who they blame it on? The tree-hugging hippie. All right. We warned you. And now that they're whining, well, the insurance companies are they're using these wildfire maps to raise our rates. Well, I am sorry. Insurance companies have actuaries, and they've been assigning risk long before these maps came out. And in fact, the maps came out to sort of codify the whole issue. So if you want to encroach upon wildfire land, there's risk assigned to that, right? It's like these people have no idea how capitalism works. They're all capitalists until they figure out what capitalism is when it affects them because of their bad decisions. Capitalism is kind of a gamble. All right? So, of course, I remember what it was. It wasn't only just the wildfire maps. It was the Oregon Extension, Oregon State Extension, the Oregon State University Extension. They are part of the what's the term? Not movement, but they are part of funding and administrating various aspects of our rural and urban divide. So part of that are like county fairs and 4-H clubs and, Sea Cadets and all of that. So because the Oregon Extension has in their bylaws something about diversity, equity, and inclusion, some 4-H clubs said they are anti-Christian because there's a rule that says, actually, that you're not supposed to have overt religious symbols like crosses, and maybe even Stars of David, but you see less of the Stars of David than you do the crosses. So, of course, by dint of the fact that Christianity is not a state religion, and they can't present it as such at the county fair, they've decided that they are basically going to kick the Oregon State Extension out, and if their 4-H clubs go by the wayside, so be it. It's just crazy. They'll gouge their own eyes out because they don't want to see what's right in front of them. Okay. So, because I mentioned in my indelible way that, look, if some religious extremists are going to use our 4-H clubs as examples of their religious extremism, don't you think that you should place the blame on them? Of course not, because there's enough people here in this town, or a few loudmouth bullies, who just cannot stand anything that would, have empathy for another human being. Yep. So this fellow, do I take him seriously? Because usually these aren't announced, but people are crazy enough. They'll do the crazy thing. But in the midst of this back and forth, after being called, I was promoting pedophile books at the library. And he knows all about me, and I go under various pseudonyms. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? I don't even believe in pseudonyms. I mean, I've been going by my name since I was a kid, and they gave it to me. During the punk movement, all I had to do was go by Justice. It's my middle name. I didn't have to make it up. The reason I don't believe in pseudonyms, and I'll tell you, is because I wanted to honor my dad. I didn't want to change my name because I wanted Putnam in there somewhere. So some people might say, are you related to the historian Putnam? And I could say, yes, that's my dad. Because in my travels, I'd find people, I got to tell you, in enough places in the world who had read his books. Albeit they weren't for the general public. My dad was a professional historian, and professional historians read his books. So I wanted to honor my dad. So for this idiot to say I have various pseudonyms, it just flies in the face of everything that I've been since I was a kid. And also in the week since my dad died. Now, I'm not going to give them the benefit of using that so that they can express even more cruelty. This fellow's big concern was that, you're going to say that those kids are the troublemakers, and you're going to make rules against those kids, meaning that this guy was a bully growing up. Or, I don't know, now's the time for him to be a bully? Jesus. There was a story at our gatherings for Mom, and then it'll also be brought up with Dad, but my mom absolutely forbid me to hit people. That didn't mean that we weren't taught how to box or wrestle or any of the other things called self-defense. But I think her great fear was I was going to go out there and be a bully and start fights because I knew how to box. I knew how to wrestle. I knew how to control the situation. So she absolutely forbid it. And so somebody was telling the story about when our priest, Father Solar, at our Catholic school in Springfield, Oregon, St. Alice's, came to Mom and said, you ought to let Roy, because that's my first name, you ought to let Roy stand up for himself, the kids are hitting him, and he just stands there and takes it. So, let's just say I could stand up to the bully, and at some point I was allowed to hit back. And one thing I learned about a bully is that when you hit back, they don't really want to be a bully anymore. They want to be your friend. Now, I got to tell you, I will never be friends with Nazis. You can't trust a Nazi. I always make the joke about people you can't trust, like heroin addicts. That's just anecdotal. I've just had some bad issues with heroin addicts, Somewhere along the line, they're going to stab you in the back. At least that's been my experience, and it's very limited. I know it's only been with scores. But I'm still not willing to say that everybody is like that. That is just my anecdotal experience. I'd use it as a joke. But what is not a joke is that you can never trust a Nazi. Ever. Is that dehumanizing them? Damn right it is. So this fellow says he knows so much about me and he has a file on me. What does that mean? So do I take that seriously, or do I take it as the rantings of a loon? I usually take it as the rantings of a loon. But rantings of a loon in this town means they also are well armed. So I have to take that into consideration. So, but I don't bully easily. And I think I've been allowed to hit back when need be. So, I don't know. I just don't want my house firebombed. I don't want my dogs poisoned. That kind of stuff. Because this is the kinds of things that these people do, and I know it's anecdotal experience, but I've experienced it. The crosses burned on the lawn, as you know. Had dogs killed when I was working on Eric Koenigshofer's campaign back in the 90s. We always said it was the progeny of the people that burned down Jack London's house in the Valley of the Moon. His wolf house. Yeah. Bunch of redneck assholes. Oh, there's a commie in our midst. Let's burn down his house. And they did. Jack London's. So, I know what these people are capable of. They've been using not stochastic terrorism, but actual terrorism. For as long as I can remember, the crosses burned on the lawn have an indelible memory. Gives you an indelible memory. It really does. It's literally seared into your brain cells. So, excuse me that I prefer not to break bread with Nazis. All right? And people burning crosses in your front lawn, to me, are like Nazis. Maybe not even like, they are. For all intents and purposes. So, where am I going with this? I don't know. Just that if you suddenly don't hear from me and the radio station drops off, I don't know. Check the local news in the Southern Oregon area. Maybe it'll make it. I don't know. So, I guess I just looked at the time. I am so sorry. I better give you what we have in store for you here on this fabulous Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Oh, one small reminder, we do roast the corn after soaking it for a copious period of time in a lime lemon water bath. And then it's roasted in its husk. And then we cut the kernels off the husk. Put them in the chowder, okay? Just so you know, adds a nice little pop. We like it. Well, what do we have in store for you as we begin in the Bistro Cafe? MAGA Mike and the other insurgents have 0.00 chance of prevailing in their legal challenges to keep Kamala off the ballot, but they'll still try by any means necessary. And you know they will, right up to the point of trying to take over the U.S. Capitol with violent means. Because that's the way they are. It's not stochastic. It is actual. Then on the rest of the menu, one of the nation's largest corporate landlords will pay 35 California cities $20 million for making repairs without permits. What idiots. A Massachusetts woman has been sentenced to 3 years of probation for calling in fake bomb threats at Boston's Children's Hospital. The bomb threats were called in during a time when they were being inundated with all sorts of threats of violence, bomb and otherwise, because they treat trans kids. Oh, my God. And the EPA has awarded $4.3 billion to fund projects in 30 states to reduce climate pollution. Yeah, commie hippies. Tree huggers. After the break, we move to the chef's table. This burns me up, where a Russian-American journalist for Radio Free Europe has been sentenced to 6.5 years in prison after a secret trial. Jesus. And the EU is putting new pressure on Hungary's Orban over his outreach to Russia. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, and it is by Peter Wawrzycki out of the Washington Post. Invitation Homes, one of the nation's largest corporate landlords, will pay $20 million to a whistleblower and 35 California cities to settle a lawsuit charging that the company made unapproved renovations to its portfolio of 12,000 homes in the state. And the company said the lawsuit is without merit and that the settlement is in the best interest of all its stakeholders and allows the company to better focus on its core business operations. Its stock is worth $22 billion. So a slap on the wrist. An attorney for the whistleblower said the purpose of the lawsuit was to shine a light on the practices of large corporate landlords that emerged after the Great Recession to buy tens of thousands of single-family homes and convert them into rentals. We're hoping this has made homes safer for the people who are renting houses from large companies like Invitation Homes, said Vince McKnight, an attorney at Sanford Heisler Sharp. A Washington Post story in 2022 reported that building department data in 3 markets showed Invitation Homes properties were less likely to have permits for renovations and other projects. At more than a dozen Invitation Homes properties across several states, the company hired contractors for renovations for which there is no record of the required permits. In multiple examples, the unpermitted work left tenants with homes in poor condition. Well, they're cutting costs. Formed by Wall Street investors after the Great Recession and the foreclosure crisis, the company accumulated tens of thousands of houses across several states at depressed prices and then spent hundreds of millions of dollars on renovations. The company said it was leading a real estate revolution. Yeah, let's break the rules. In most parts of the country, local officials require building permits for significant home renovations, changing the plumbing, rewiring an electrical circuit, or replacing a roof often call for payment of a fee and sometimes inspections. The responsibility for pulling a permit lies with both the owner and the licensed contractor doing the work. And the process can cause delay and add thousands of dollars to renovation costs, which you factor in, of course. Building officials, however, say the permitting process ensures the quality and safety of homes. And that's the whole point. You don't want your roof blowing off in a 5-mile-per-hour wind, like what happened in Florida over and over and over. Associated Press staff brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Massachusetts woman has been sentenced to 3 years of probation for calling in a fake bomb threat at Boston's Children's Hospital as it faced a barrage of harassment over its surgical program for transgender youths. The Catherine Levy, the perp, pleaded guilty last year in federal court to charges including making a false bomb threat. Authorities say the threat was made in August of 2022 as the hospital was facing an onslaught of threats and harassment. The hospital launched the country's first pediatric and adolescent transgender health program. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced yesterday, Monday, that she had been sentenced on Thursday. Her attorney, Forrest O'Neill Greenberg, did not immediately respond to a request seeking comment, and when has anyone? The hospital became the focus of far-right social media accounts, news outlets, and bloggers last year after they found informational YouTube videos published by the hospital about surgical offerings for transgender patients. The caller said, "There is a bomb on the way to the hospital. You better evacuate everybody, you sickos," according to court documents. The threat resulted in a lockdown of the hospital. No explosives were found. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The Environmental Protection Agency is awarding $4.3 billion in grants to fund projects in 30 states to reduce climate pollution. The money will go to 25 projects targeting greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, electric power, commercial and residential buildings, industry, agriculture, and waste and materials management. The grants are paid for by the 2022 climate law approved by congressional Democrats. The law, officially known as the Inflation Reduction Act, remember when Joe got that passed? It includes nearly $400 billion in spending and tax credits to accelerate the expansion of clean energy such as wind and solar power, speeding the nation's transition away from oil, coal, and natural gas that largely cause climate change. The latest round of grants includes $396 million to Pennsylvania to reduce industrial greenhouse emissions from cement, asphalt, and other material. EPA Administrator Michael Regan will join Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro in Pittsburgh yesterday, Monday, to announce the grant receipts in his state, a political battleground in the 2024 election. Senior EPA leaders also joined Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California to announce nearly $500 million for transportation and freight decarbonization at the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. The grants will provide incentives for electric charging equipment, zero-emission freight vehicles, and conversion of cargo handling equipment to lower emissions. Well, good. And we also got quite a bit, I think $300 million here in Oregon, or was it only 30? Well, regardless, it was quite a bit of money getting infused here to lower our own greenhouse gases, and they like to burn trash. So just remember that. All right, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family.
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. After a storm or disaster, it's important to eat only safe food. Throw away perishables like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and leftovers stored above 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours or more. Throw away food with an unusual odor, color, or texture. Throw away food that may have come in contact with floodwater, including food in swollen, punctured, and damaged cans. When in doubt, throw it out.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Read the dissent. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In the recent Supreme Court decision on gerrymandering from South Carolina, 6 justices approved of the legislature having pushed black voters into the one predominantly black and Democratic district in order to make the district where those voters had been securely white and securely Republican. In other words, wipe out the second majority minority district. Theoretically, racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional, but now a state can engage in racial gerrymandering if it can invent some vaguely plausible pretext for the race-based decision. The only non-racial reason that South Carolina offered was that the legislature was engaged only in overtly partisan gerrymandering to create another Republican seat, which this Supreme Court previously has ruled was just fine. In the South Carolina case, the 3 district court judges who heard the witnesses and reviewed mountains of evidence ruled that the state's decision was based on race. Under centuries of precedent, those findings would have been binding on an appellate court. But not here, no longer, not in a gerrymandering challenge. Rather, the government is entitled to a huge presumption in its favor. Justice Kagan concludes, quote, "In the electoral sphere especially, where ugly patterns of pervasive racial discrimination have so long governed, we should demand better. Of ourselves, of our political representatives, and most of all, of this court." The problem with the quite brilliant dissent is, well, it's the dissent. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. President Joe Biden withdrew July 21st as the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. What's next in the process, and how does that process work? It's important to note that the political parties make their own nomination rules, and although the situation is rare, bylaws for both parties provide for candidates who can't or choose not to remain a nominee. Once Biden has released his delegates, they are no longer bound to vote for him in the first round. Biden has endorsed Harris, and she may get the majority of the 1,976 delegates she needs out of Biden's 3,896. Delegates in 4 states have already pledged support for Harris. A virtual roll call nomination, originally planned to nominate Biden before Ohio's August 9th ballot deadline, is expected in the next few days. It's possible that Harris will be nominated at that virtual meeting, locking out potential rivals before the convention. Democratic Party leadership appears to be falling in line, with over 150 members of Congress and a majority of Democratic U.S. senators endorsing Harris. If the virtual meeting doesn't give Harris a majority on the first ballot, it still could go to the convention, which begins August 19th. An open convention with no presumptive nominee has not occurred since 1968. We have articles, explainers, and the DNC rules at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1913. That was the day 9,000 copper miners in the Keweenaw region of Upper Peninsula, Michigan, went out on strike. Organized by the Western Federation of Miners, the strike raged on for over 8 months, witnessing devastating tragedy in a Christmas Day fire and ending in bitter defeat. The strike was waged over basic issues like the 8-hour day, higher wages, mine safety, and union recognition. But strikers were also fed up with the company's paternalism and intrusion into their personal lives. They also worried for their jobs with the introduction of labor-saving machinery. The Western Federation of Miners succeeded early on in shutting down the mines, but the copper barons wouldn't budge. By August, many mines reopened with scab labor. Later that month, deputies shot 2 strikers dead and wounded 2 others as they returned home from attempting to collect strike benefits. The incident became known as the Seaborville Massacre. Striking miners were absolutely devastated when on Christmas Day, 73, mostly children, were trampled to death during a Christmas party and benefit at the Italian Hall in Calumet. Witnesses remembered seeing a man with a Citizens Alliance button just moments before someone yelled fire that caused the stampede. Soon after the Italian Hall disaster, Western Federation of Miner President Charles Moyer was shot by a Citizens Alliance mob, then loaded, bleeding, onto a train bound for Chicago. By April, the union was broke, the strike was broken, and the miners resolved to return to work. Bosses would only rehire strikers once they had turned in their union cards. The copper mines in the region would finally be organized some 30 years later in a campaign led by Mine Mill during the years 1939 to 1943. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 62 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the mid to upper 90s. We are currently under a air quality alert because of wildfires nearby, and though at the moment, and then we'll get to those numbers quite soon, is not quite bad here at the mothership, but we will expect it to worsen later on. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then partly cloudy overnight with lows in the low 60s. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, then a few passing clouds tomorrow, otherwise generally sunny, highs in the mid-90s. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated moderate here in our little hamlet of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the moderate range at 80 parts per million. And that daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so take care on all accounts. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.05 inches. Visibility is up to 8 miles. And relative humidity is at 72%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. And that is the Weather Underground. London is 75 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 73 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 93 and sunny with their heat advisory that they've had for over a week. Kabul is 80 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 88 and cloudy. Tokyo is 86 and fair. Auckland, New Zealand is 52 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 61 and fair. Chicago, Illinois is 78 degrees and fair. And New York, New York is 75 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Dasha Litvanova at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A court has convicted Alsu Kurmasheva, a Russian-American journalist, for the U.S. government-funded Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty of spreading false information about the Russian army and sentenced her to 6.5 years in prison after a secret trial, court records and officials said yesterday, Monday. Kurmasheva's family, her employer, and the U.S. government have rejected the charges against her and have called for her release. The conviction in Kazan, the capital of Russia's central region of Tatarstan, came on Friday. The same day, a court in the Russian city of Yekaterinburg convicted Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gersovich of espionage and sentenced him to 16 years in prison in a case the U.S. has called politically motivated. Kurmasheva, a 47-year-old editor at Radio Free Europe's Tatar Bashkir language service, was convicted of spreading false information, that's in quotes, by the way, about the military after a trial that lasted just 2 days, according to the website of the Supreme Court of Tatarstan. Court spokesperson Natalia Luseva confirmed Kurmasheva's conviction and revealed the sentence to the AP by phone in the case classified as secret. Kurmasheva was ordered to serve the sentence in a medium-security penal colony, Luseva said. My daughters and I know Alsu has done nothing wrong, and the world knows it too. We need her home, Kurmasheva's husband, Pavel Buterin, said in a post on Monday on Twitter. He said last year the charges stemmed from a book the Tatar Bashkir service released in 2022 called No to War, a collection of short stories of Russians who don't want their country to be at war with Ukraine. Buterin had said the book does not contain any false information. Matthew Miller, the U.S. State Department spokesman, said Kurmasheva is being, quote, targeted by Russian authorities for her uncompromising commitment to speaking the truth and her principled reporting. Kurmasheva, who holds U.S. and Russian citizenship and lives in Prague with her husband and 2 daughters, was taken into custody in October of 2023 and charged with failing to register as a foreign agent while collecting information about the Russian military. Joiner at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Hungary won't be allowed to host a strategic EU meeting next month because Prime Minister Viktor Orban's self-proclaimed peace mission trips to Moscow and Beijing this month, aimed at brokering an end to the war in Ukraine, which EU partners overwhelmingly saw as undermining their support for Kyiv. Hungary currently holds the rotating EU presidency and as such had expected to host the annual late August gathering known as the Gymnich in late August. This gathering should now be held in the EU capital in September. Josep Borrell, the EU Foreign Affairs Chief, announced. Orban is seen as having the warmest relationship with Russia in the EU and is largely politically isolated in his stance on the Ukraine war. His government has held up sanctions in Moscow and huge tranches of military aid for Kyiv agreed by all other partners. Before the decision was announced, the Hungarian foreign minister said that the idea of moving the August meeting from Budapest to Brussels was a case of fantastic revenge. He slammed what he called a concerted, hysterical, often mocking series of attacks on Orban's recent surprise meetings with Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Borrell, the foreign affairs chief, said yesterday that while condemnation of Hungary's recent behavior was widespread, the other EU member states had been divided between those who wanted to attend in Budapest and those who did not. Ultimately, he said, it was within his power to decide, and he did. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesday. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.